Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to Surface Sessions here at the Molten Music Technology Laboratory in deepest, sunny Norfolk. It's been a really long time since my last Surface video and I'm really sorry about that. I had intended to do one a week, but it's been months. The reason is that shortly after finishing the videos on how to set up the Surface Pro 4 for music, I sort of ran into a whole bunch of problems. What sort of problems, I hear you ask? Well, stuff like this. And this, and a bit of that. Although some things did seem to work very well, like this. So for the last couple of months I've been working through these issues. I've tried every tweak, every hack, every workaround. I've tried sort of gentle persuasion, shouting and poking it with sharp sticks. And I haven't really wanted to talk about it until I could gather together enough evidence to properly present what I thought the problem was. It might have been a fault with my specific surface, and I had to be sure about that. I also was working with Microsoft on the problem, and I needed to give them time to come up with some kind of solution. And I also wanted to gather experiences and stories from other users. And has all that been successful? Yes, partly. But I desperately wanted and assumed that the Surface Pro 4 would be flawless, and it isn't. So, some music software works fine. Some music software just really doesn't. Most of the issues can be sort of worked around, and I will show you how to do that. There's also a lot of inconsistency where something that might fix one door doesn't seem to work in another one. So all I can really do is present my findings as clearly and as honestly as possible so that you can make some kind of informed choice. So this video is going to show a whole number of tests, a whole load of musical tests that I've run on different surfaces with different audio interfaces, different bits of DAW software in order to demonstrate what happens on the Surface Pro 4. What is it that's causing the problem, where the issues arise, and also where it is working fine. It's a long video, but then I needed to put everything out on the table and I needed to be as thorough as possible. I've speeded some bits up which show flawless playback, so you just have to take my sort of word for it. And some of the glitches can be really difficult to hear, but I tend to make sort of gestures when they occur, and so you should have no problem spotting them. If you want to just skip directly to my conclusions at the end of this video, then please do so, that's fair enough. But I would recommend watching this through because there's a lot of good information there. There's a lot of things that show how it works and how it doesn't work. And really, you kind of need all of that stuff together to have any idea as to what's going on and whether a Surface Pro 4 is going to be suitable for you for your music production. So let's get to it. Welcome to my bank of Surface Pro 4s. I've got an i5 4 gig here, an i5 8 gig here, and my original i5 8 gig here. And I'm going to be able to test all three so that I can demonstrate that whatever's going on is not just specific to my Surface. Also at the back here, I've got my Surface Pro 3, which I'm going to use as a comparison and as a benchmark because it continues to work beautifully with everything. I've got three different audio interfaces to use. I've got my trusty Steinberg UR28M chunky one. I've got my simple and yet always seems to work Avid Fast Track Duo. And then as a new one, I've got this Zoom box called the UAC2, which is an actual USB 3 audio interface. So I thought I might try that to see if that makes any difference at all. So that's the basic setup. The new Surface Pro 4s are not tweaked, they're just updated and straight out of the box, whereas my original Surface Pro 4 is tweaked completely for music making, so just to see if there's any difference in that. Right, let's get started. Going to kick off then with Pro Tools, because this is kind of where all the trouble began, where I first started seeing the issues. I've got a 16-track project loaded up here. Ding, ding, ding. And then if we look in the mixer window, you'll see along the top I've got a channel strip loaded onto each one, just to give the CPU something to get its teeth into. The project is all audio, it's 16 tracks of an acoustic set, which sounds really nice, and you're going to probably hear that a lot during this video, but also it's quite a light project. I mean, a phone could do 16 tracks of audio and a few effects loaded. It's not a big deal, and that's going to form the basis of one of our test projects. The system usage meter in Pro Tools is quite useful in this case. It will show us what the CPU is doing, you know, roughly, and also shows the inconsistency between what the individual cores are doing and what the overall CPU is doing, which doesn't make any sense, and it shouldn't, because that doesn't, but that's all part of the problem. So when I set this going, the problem should reveal itself. Now the CPU usage is at about sort of 9–10%. It's a mild little project, should be no trouble at all. So there you go. Did you hear that? You might not have heard that, but those were glitches. Those were dropouts in the audio where it goes. It's like when your needle hits a big chunk of dust on a turntable. It's that kind of glitch. And at the same time, the CPU meter here is shooting up towards 100%. And that is the basis of our problem, where a very light, sort of mild project will suddenly wang up to 100% CPU and cause a dropout. Well, okay then, you say, maybe it's the fact I'm using ASIO for all through here on the onboard sound. We always know that's going to be a bit crap, so maybe I should try some audio interfaces to see whether it does the same thing. Okay, same project now plugged in via the Avid Fast Track Duo. I've got this plugged in via a powered USB 3 hub, which I've got my iLock in, and the audio interface. So because I need a hub, because I've got two things trying to get into the single port on the Surface Pro 4. So let's see how this fares. Are still there. The CPU meter on this occasion doesn't seem to be quite so active as it was with the ASIO for All driver, but the glitches are still there, which is the most important thing. There's always a level of inconsistency in this. Every time I test it, it's kind of slightly different. Sometimes it's all over the place. Sometimes it's very calm. Sometimes it will play back for half an hour with not a glitch at all. But more often than not, a couple of seconds and it just glitches away. So that's that one. You know, maybe the drivers on the Fast Track are a bit crappy. I mean, they don't have official Windows 10 drivers, so maybe that's it. Well, in that case, we'll try something else. It's the Steinberg UR28M, which has its own power supply, so it's not powered over USB, in case that's an issue. Going into the same USB 3 hub with the iLock into the Surface. Oh. Oh dear. So yeah, that's worse. That's worse than the Fast Track and ASIO for All by the sounds of things. So yeah, another audio interface, same problem. So it's probably not the audio interface. Now, one of the things you can do in Pro Tools to improve the situation is to change the buffer size. Now, I don't mean that the buffer size is too low or too big. It's just the action of changing the buffer size for the audio interface seems to have the effect of kind of focusing Pro Tools onto that audio driver and makes the playback a lot less glitchy. So let me demonstrate that. Let's go to Hardware Setup, Playback Engine. Currently, the Fast Track Duo is set to 256 samples, which is my usual default setting. I'm going to set it to a harder setting of 128 samples, which should be more difficult for Pro Tools to cope with, and click OK. So the CPU meter goes up a little bit because it's now working that bit harder.
Like dragonflies, their miracle blue can never tell you how it came to be.
And let's see if there's any errors.
Each different kind, accidental designed before you and me. We ask all our lives, we live so wide, and sometimes we just do, like dragonflies.
Well, I mean, that's probably enough. I mean, I can let this run for quite a while and it will be glitch free, but it's not, doesn't make for a very interesting video. But I can tell you that by doing that, you tend to get glitch free playback. It's not perfect. I've heard from people who have tried this and it's dramatically improved things, but it's not solved it. The other thing is that if you restart Pro Tools, the problem comes back. So the problem is only dealt with if you load up Pro Tools, load up your song, change the buffer size, and then play your song. Now the problem with that is that not all audio interfaces allow you to do that. And here I can go right down there. I'm going to go to 128, no, not 96, 128 samples. Hit OK. Pro Tools goes, oh, something's changed. I can't cope with that. This is just too much for my tiny brain. And I need to restart. In the majority of cases, if you're not using Avid hardware, when you change anything to do with the audio interface, Pro Tools requires you to save your project and restart Pro Tools. And in doing so, it just brings the glitches back. So if you've got something like this, it could be a workaround, but for most other audio interfaces, you're still sort of screwed, really. Well, okay then, it must be something to do with my Surface. There must be something wrong with it. I've agonized over that for weeks and weeks before Microsoft were able to send me a replacement to try. So let's try that. So this is the Loner, the Surface Pro 4 with i5 and 4 gigs of RAM. So slightly lower powered perhaps than my original Surface Pro 4. Same project, Pro Tools 12.5, which we now know is supported in Windows 10. Let's see how this one goes. Oh. Oh, click, click, click. Click, click. Yep, there's a lot of clicking going on. Let me Yeah, right, that's a complete disaster. So, well, I mean, a minute ago, before that happened, it had a complete playthrough with no glitches whatsoever. And that's some of the maddening inconsistency we get here. So I cannot say, hand on heart, that because this is the 4 gig model, that's the reason why you're getting all the glitching. I don't think it is. It's just that this one just had a particularly bad playthrough on that particular occasion. But it does demonstrate that the problem is not just on my Surface Pro 4, it's on this one as well. Let's try the replacement one to see if we can just sort of tie this all up. Right, so this is the replacement. It's a brand new i5, 8 gig, 256 gigabytes Surface Pro 4, and it's just been installed and not tweaked. I've updated it to all the latest firmwares and bits and pieces, so it's ready to go. I've put on flight mode to turn off Wi-Fi and bits and pieces so that nothing should get in the way. And let's try this. Gone back to ASIO for all because it's just the simplest way of doing it rather than plugging all the interfaces. Because I think we've established that the audio interface isn't the problem. Yeah, there we go. Glitch like crazy, the same as the 4 gig one. So that just goes to show that it's not to do with how much memory the Surface Pro 4 has. That doesn't seem to be a factor. This was glitching just as much as the other one. So hopefully that shows how it's unlikely to be the Surface that's at fault. I've had the same project, the same issues, same difficulty on every single one. Right, let's quickly just check back with the Surface Pro 3 to see if it's the same problem with the same project on there. So here's my Surface Pro 3. It's been running Pro Tools 10, Pro Tools 11, Pro Tools 12, all of it completely flawlessly for the past year or so. But just for comparison, here's the same project as I've been running on the Surface Pro 4, same version of Pro Tools, and let's just see how well that runs in comparison.
Like dragonflies, their miracle blue can never tell you how we came to be. Each different kind.
So obviously we can sit here for hours and listen to it playing back perfectly, or you can just trust me as I say that it does play it back perfectly, without a glitch, without a glimmer, with nothing. CPU meters are slightly higher, which is to be expected because it's a lower spec machine than the Surface Pro 4. Let me give you a little close-up. So as I say, it's a little bit higher than the Surface Pro 4, and that's exactly as it should be. But it's completely steady and regular. There's nothing exciting going on. So that's the sort of performance I was expecting, at least, from the Surface Pro 4, and I was completely surprised to find the glitches and the pops and the dropouts. It really sort of knocked me sideways, I suppose, because the Surface Pro 3 has kind of been amazingly flawless. And so I was expecting, perhaps unfairly, the same sort of level of flawlessness, but with more headroom on the Surface Pro 4. Okay, well maybe the problem's in Pro Tools. Well, I suppose so. So let's start looking at some other bits of software and see how well they do. Let's have a poke into Cubase then. This is Cubase Pro version 8.5.1. Same project. Obviously it's not got the same effect on because it's not in Pro Tools, but for this one I've added just a simple compressor over each of the 16 tracks. So it's the same idea, it just plays back, and it's a simple project that shouldn't cause anything, any computer, any problems at all. So let's give that a try. Again, on its own performance meter, it's only using up like 5% CPU. It's not a deep or interesting project. It's very, very simple. Now the problems in Cubase aren't anywhere near as pronounced. It's not this constant clicking that you get in Pro Tools. Instead, what you get is almost like an internal build-up where suddenly it just goes BAM! And you get this big dropout just every once in a while. There we go. Did you hear that? Yeah, that was a complete dropout. And the VST performance meter here has peaked right into the red. So it's not anywhere as prevalent as on Pro Tools, but the issue is the same, that it's running along fine and then suddenly the CPU is caught doing something else. Maybe it's gone off to, oh, I don't know, put some toast on or to have a coffee, and so Cubase finds itself without any CPU to use and goes wham and gives a dropout because it can't keep that data flowing. And again, this is the same regardless of which audio interface that I use, regardless of which surface I use. It's the same problem. Now with Pro Tools there was a little workaround using buffer sizes. Does that work in Cubase? Not really, no, but one thing I have found that has worked, or helped rather, is if you go to Devices, Device Setup, look at the VST audio system, you have a couple of things here, a couple of checkboxes. One is multiprocessing, the other is ASIO guard. Now ASIO guard is supposed to be a clever way of using sort of dead time on the CPU to improve performance and smooth out the possibility of clicks and pops. However, what I've found is that if you disable that, then the clicks and dropouts in Cubase are less frequent. To the point in some cases of them disappearing entirely. But I mean, I've heard from a number of people who have tried this and it's certainly helped, but it's not completely solved the problem. So let's just try that for a minute to see whether that has in fact improved things. I mean, a bit more CPU is being used up because we've turned off the ASIO guard, so there's been a slight drop in performance. But essentially, you know, you're going to have to take my word for it that we're unlikely to hear a glitch for ages, you know, if at all. So what's going on with that ASIO guard thing that to think disabling it is going to help? I don't know. I mean, it all obviously seems to be something to do with CPU, something to do with power profiles, and yet, regardless of what profile I set in Windows itself, in the power profile bit, whether I put it to high performance or to balance mode, the result is largely the same. Moving on to Studio One, same project, just a bunch of audio files with some effects loaded in that at the moment is running on, you know, a few percent of processing power. Oh. Oops. Oh. So it's the same deal. It's clicking and popping, a bit more like Pro Tools was, less like Cubase, I suppose. So is there any way in Studio One that it can be improved? Yes. If you go to the options, go to audio setup, you have an option here for multiprocessing. If you disable multiprocessing, hit OK, then try it. It appears to keep it under control. So the glitches appear to have gone at this point, and I haven't really let it play back for hours just to check that it's completely gone, but it seems much better when running on a single processor, I guess. The downside though, of course, is that you're running on one processor where you have 2 cores and 2 virtual cores to play with, and so you should be able to use those on your system, whereas now you are reduced to using a single core, but at least it's sort of working, which is good. Is that good? Bad? I'm not sure. So maybe then the whole thing is a multiprocessor issue. Yeah, I mean, I tried that, but in Pro Tools, no, that didn't seem to make any difference. In Cubase, well, you think it makes a difference, but actually what makes a difference is turning off the ASIO guard, which tends to come off at the same time as you turn off the multiprocessing. So it's not just about multiprocessing, because the problem is a bit like hyperthreading used to be back in the day. Back in the day when hyperthreading was new, it was a disaster. You'd get all this fluttering CPU business going on as it tries to use this new and exciting technology. But that's been sorted out and greatly improved. So it's a bit like that, but it's not that. So, you know, the solutions and workarounds in each piece of software are, again, annoyingly inconsistent. Now, there are some bits of DAW software for whom it doesn't seem to be that much of a problem. Hooray, let's use those. Yeah, well, that's a great idea. One of those is Bitwig Studio. I mean, this time I've loaded up actually twice as many effects, and it's not bothered, and it runs along at a nice, even, small amount of percentage CPU. So what is Bitwig doing that other bits of software aren't? Well, that's a really good question, and one to which I don't really have an answer. However, Bitwig's not the only one that seems to work okay. Ableton Live, that seems okay. Reason 8 has, for me, been completely fine. I've not seen any glitches, whereas I've heard from other people who have experienced some troubles when using Reason and the same sort of issues that we've had before. However, just playing back this song now, I've just heard a couple of glitches, which is a new one on me. So I was tempted to put Reason into the this is working bucket, but actually no, it might have to sit in the bad boy bucket. Reaper, well, that seems completely unfussed by the whole experience, as you'd expect, and it just chugs along like it always does. Here's FL Studio, which, for the most part, seems completely fine. I say for the most part because there's a slightly different issue with FL Studio. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to compare it to the Surface Pro 3 just to demonstrate what that problem is. So I've got the same project playing back on the Surface Pro 4 and the Surface Pro 3. I'm just going to zoom in a bit to demonstrate what this strange difference is between the two. So here is the Surface Pro 3, you can tell by the little thing over here. As I grab the mixer, you see how nice and smooth that is. Now if I come over to the Surface Pro 4, do exactly the same thing. It's not liking it to the point that it starts to crack up. Oh, it's gone away now. Let's bring that back in. Can you see that compared to this on the Surface Pro 3? So that's weird. I can't really explain that. Is it a completely different issue to the other one we're seeing? Is it to do with the graphics engine being different on the Surface Pro 4? Or is it all bundled up into the same issue? I don't know. But suffice to say, it's a pain in the arse. So there you have it. You know, that's just a 16-track audio test with a few plugins thrown in. It's a sort of project that even your mum's laptop could cope with, and yet we seem to be having lots of mixed results. On the one hand, you've got Pro Tools and Cubase and Studio One all glitching like little buggers, and on the other you've got Bitwig Studio, Ableton Live, Reaper, that all seem to be working okay, at least under this test. And sort of in the middle you've got Reason and FL Studio that seem to perhaps have their own problems. So what I'm going to do now is cross-check this with a completely different test using virtual instruments. And let's see what occurs. Here's a good comparison test that I like to use in Cubase. I load up a project with a whole ton of Halion instruments, and then I run a simple sequence through it, and that can give me a good idea of the total polyphony that the system is capable of. So I'm going to run the Surface Pro 3 as a benchmark. I've got 64 instances of Halion loaded, but I've only got 40 actually activated. And what you do is that you activate more Halions or deactivate them depending on what the system can handle. And then, you know, there's your benchmark. The MIDI sequence running through it is just like a note added every beat till you get this big sustained chord which holds for a number of times, and then that loops around and starts again. It's very obvious when you hear it, and it goes a bit like this. So if the CPU is in any danger, it's going to crackle at that point. Yeah? So we're going to pay particular attention to the VST meter here, which is going to climb as this whole thing plays back. So let's reset and give it a go. Now, as you can see, that's right on the edge of what the Surface Pro 3 is capable of doing. That's 40 Halions, each running like 16 or 32 voices of polyphony. So that's really good. It's pretty good. If I was to enable another one, it would probably push it over the edge. Yeah, see, there you go. So there you go, brilliantly demonstrates the stability of the Surface Pro 3. It can do all of those instruments, all that polyphony up until a point, and then you add a little bit more and then it crumbles. That's completely expected behavior of any computer system running Cubase. So let's compare that to the Surface Pro 4. I don't know if you noticed, but I plugged back in the Steinberg UR28M audio interface because I figured, you know, Steinberg software, Steinberg hardware gives it the best chance of working well. Yeah? So here's that same Halion project again, this time on the Surface Pro 4. 40 of them are activated out of the 64 loaded. Let's have a look. It's the same audio interface as before. Everything is identical to what the Surface Pro 3 was doing. Dropout. So that is at 40. That's exactly the level at which the Surface Pro 3 was completely and comfortably fine. There you go. So you can see where the average load is until it peaks, and that's about right because it's given you like a, I don't know, 15-20% performance increase over the Surface Pro 3. It looks like it should be able to do a lot more, but it just leaps to the 100% and glitches. So I mean, what we can do, we can disable a whole bunch of these. Okay, this just got it on 32. Let's see if that'll do a pass. No. See, the thing is, it seems okay until then it jumps and it's not okay. All right, let's go to our ASIO guard setting here. I'm going to disable that. Apply. Let's see if that makes any difference at all. See, the problem there is that we've lost a load of performance because we've turned off ASIO guard. And now we're going to have to step down in the number of Halions that it can do. Okay, so what we're seeing there is on the Surface Pro 4, it's able to do about 30 once I've disabled ASIO guard to remove the glitch that happens all the time for no reason. Once I've done that, then it's able to achieve glitch-free playback, at least it appears to under this test so far, but it can only do about 30 Halions, whereas the Surface Pro 3 could do 40. So that's like a 30% drop in performance going from the Surface Pro 3 to the Surface Pro 4 because I've had to turn off that ASIO guard setting. So although I can sort of persuade Cubase to work, it's not working at the performance level that it should. And actually, the Surface Pro 3 is beating it hands down. Okay then, well let's try some software synth action that I can stick across all of the different bits of DAW software and see how that copes. Right, so now we're going to mess around with Native Instruments Reaktor 6. Reaktor 6 is fantastic, it's awesome. It's also a really meaty synth that uses up a whole chunk of CPU power, you know, just to breathe. It's also available standalone as a VST plugin and as a Pro Tools plugin, and so it's really a good one to spread around in all the different bits of software to see how it performs. So as a first instance, I'm just going to load it up. I'm going to load up this particular Quadropolis patch and just see if we get some sensible playback. That's always a good place to start. As I say, it's awesome. I love Reaktor. It's just the best thing ever. And running it on the Surface Pro 4, it's always been completely flawless. This was one of the first things I stuck on my Surface when I got it through. And it just runs brilliantly. So I never had any inkling that there were any underlying problems with any other software. Reaktor 6 also has its own CPU meter, which is flashing away in the top corner here. And currently it says 26-27%. Which goes up maybe 1% when I actually run a note through it. And I'm just playing one note, not getting too excited or anything like that. So before we run it through any DAWs, let's just check with the Surface Pro 3 to see how that compares. So here's a Surface Pro 3, Reaktor 6 loaded, same patch, same note from the keyboard. And this up here on its meter gives about 28% at rest and sort of 29% when playing a note. So that's probably the right sort of level of difference. The Surface Pro 4 should do better than the Surface Pro 3, and with Reaktor in standalone mode, it does. That's as expected. That's how it should be. So that's good. That's a really good, positive starting point. So let's now run that through a bunch of DAWs and see how they cope with it. Right, well, let's jump into Pro Tools, where all the trouble began, and see how it copes with Reaktor. Well, a bit of a spoiler alert, it does all right. It does so well, in fact, I've put 2 Reaktors and it goes a bit like this. And sort of so on. I mean, the CPU meter is banging around a little bit, and it's certainly filled up sort of half of 2 of those cores. So there's core number 2 and core number 3 are both sort of jumping up and down between 20 and sort of 50% CPU. And then the total CPU is sort of climbing between 40 and up kind of as far as you like. But there's no glitches, there's no pops, there's no dropouts. So Pro Tools is coping with these quite intense virtual instruments pretty well. But however, what I expected was instant clicks and pops like we did in the other project. But with this, no, we're using much more of the CPU. It seems much happier. I don't have any idea why. So let me just zoom in again on the CPU. So let's compare that to the Surface Pro 3, same Reaktor project, same instruments loaded, and it's sort of at rest CPU on here is around sort of 40 to 50%, which is remarkably similar to the Surface Pro 4, I think. And there seems to be a lot less movement in it. But let's set it going, see what happens. Yeah, it's steady, it's fine, it's between 50–60%. You know, it's certainly on a par with the Surface Pro 4, but it seems that bit more stable, that bit more together. It doesn't look like it's about to run off at any second, or if I move anything on the screen, it doesn't look in danger of crackling, whereas on the Surface Pro 4 it does a little bit. However, I do need to point out again the fact that it is working on both platforms without glitch or anything like that, and so this is a real positive thing for the Surface Pro 4, that it's able to do that remarkably well. So Cubase then, let's give that a try. Did you hear that? Oh, and again. See, that's Cubase again, with its random glitching going on. However, if I disable ASIO Guard, I mean, why don't we just keep ASIO Guard disabled now from now on? I mean, should we take it as read that Cubase with ASIO Guard on is going to screw up, and we'll just leave that off in all other future tests, of which I don't know if I have any. So let's try that out. So those glitches appear to have gone. So let's set the project going. So with ASIO Guard disabled then, the VST performance seems fine. It's at the moment between 25 and 50, so sort of 30 to 40 CPU on the average load. The instruments themselves are actually running quite high in terms of CPU. This one is running at more like 30%, which is a few percent more than it was when running standalone. And the other one similarly is above 40% now. So it's interesting how Reaktor in different bits of software actually seems to use up different amounts of CPU. Very interesting. And obviously Cubase is being hampered because of the removal of the ASIO guard. So shall we compare it to the Surface Pro 3 just to see? Okay. But something else that's interesting is if you look in the top corner here, the CPU usage on the individual plugins is here reading about sort of 25%, whereas on the Surface Pro 4 it was reading as more like 40%. So, you know, we have just huge buckets full of inconsistency, which do not help me in trying to come up with some kind of consistent test and solution and result and all those sorts of things. It's just constantly messing me about. Right, what's next? Studio One then, let's give that a go. Reaktor 6, we'll drop that in. We'll add that in there. It's interesting how Reaktor scales differently on different bits of software. So in here in Studio One, it's kind of small and getting a little bit too small, whereas in Pro Tools and Cubase, it's big, sort of full screen kind of thing going on. It's just interesting. Oh! Ah! Ooh! So yeah, Studio One doesn't like that at all, not one bit, no siree. So let's try the fix we did before, which is to go into Options, Audio Setup, take off the multi-processing bit. So yeah, that's much better. So if you again disable multiprocessing as we did before, we can see that the performance is much improved. By performance I mean the lack of glitch and pops and clicks. I don't mean the CPU performance, because by disabling multiprocessing we are reducing the amount of processing that we can actually do. Okay, Studio One comparing Surface Pro 4 to Surface Pro 3 with the Reaktor project. So they're both playing back the same thing. Over here we have the Surface Pro 3, playback. There's the processor meter down there. It looks like it's bouncing around 50%. That'd be fair. And in the actual Reaktor itself, it's saying about sort of 35–36%. On the Surface Pro 4, which is now playing back, so I've turned off the multi-processing, our performance meter down here is bouncing around sort of 40–50%, so kind of similar to the Surface Pro 3. And the percentage level up here is sort of 29–30%, which is a little bit less than the Surface Pro 3, which is exactly what it should be. So it appears then with Studio One, the key is to disabling multi-processing, which gives you glitch-free playback, performance on a par with the Surface Pro 3, but of course it's not as good as it should be because you are disabling multi-processing. Ableton Live, let's have a look at that. Now this Ableton Live has been working quite well with the 16-track project and stuff like that. However, I've heard from people who have had trouble with it and can't get it to do anything very much at all without spluttering around the place. So let's check out the Reaktor demo to see if that does anything slightly different. So this is the Surface Pro 3 running it. I've got two of them running here, both of them sequenced. So I've got the underlying quadrupolis thing going and then the synth on top, which we can't hear because I've got the other one plugged in. But that's just running away all by itself. Meanwhile, over here on the Surface Pro 4, same project, same thing going on. Let's just see how it compares. Well, first of all, it handles it without any problem at all. It's running well, there's no glitching or weirdness going on, and you know, the performance is good, it's okay. However, there's something slightly strange in that if we compare the Surface Pro 3 to the Surface Pro 4, we find that actually the Surface Pro 3 is performing better, which is a little bit unexpected since Ableton was running so well. So by what I mean is that if I bring the camera in again, so the Surface Pro 3 is currently playing back, as you can see, and up here the processor meter shows about sort of 38, 39%, that kind of thing, and about 30% on the Reaktor instrument itself. Okay, that's fine. Come over here to the Surface Pro 4 and start playing. You can see that that's at 42% and the actual instance is at about 35-36%, which is a fair bit more than the Surface Pro 3. So in this instance, with this particular test, the Surface Pro 3 is performing better than the Surface Pro 4. Both are doing all right, and we're certainly getting some use out of Ableton Live, which is awesome, and Reaktor is working brilliantly, which is great, but it should be performing better, and the Surface Pro 3 should not be beating it in terms of processing power. So is there somewhere where I can show it working properly? Yeah, I think so. Bitwig Studio seems to be the place where everything is happening best of all. So I've loaded up the Reaktor project on both of these. I've got the Surface Pro 3 running and playing back, and the Surface Pro 4 plays back in a very similar way. Just turn that down a little bit. And so rather than playing it from a keyboard, I've just put a sequence on both, so it's playing back both these Reaktor instruments. Now Bitwig has this kind of interesting DSP graph thing that we can throw in to see as a comparison. So here on the Surface Pro 3 you can see how on the DSP graph here it's over 50%. Come back out to the Surface Pro 4 playing exactly the same stuff and it's definitely under 50%. Can you see that? Can you see that the Surface Pro 4 on this side, the performance is better than on the Surface Pro 3. This again is what I totally expected to see whenever I compare the Surface Pro 3 to the Surface Pro 4. So that's how it should be. That's how it should be with everything. And that starts giving you the confidence to start playing around with it. Because ultimately all you're trying to do is make a bit of music. It shouldn't be hard, it shouldn't be difficult, it shouldn't be stressful, it should be joyous and wonderful. And here we are, making a load of music. Bitwig Studio seems to know what it's about. Why do all these other bits of software have struggles? Arrgh. So where does that leave us? Well, at the moment it leaves me wanting to create one more test project, something that combines multi-track audio with a bit of Reaktor, just to see how that goes. So my final test project is simply 8 tracks of audio plus a Reaktor plugin, just to see whether they both run together okay. I'll see if I can add effects and stuff as I go and see what crackles or what doesn't. starting off in Pro Tools is not looking very good. It's crackling and popping all over the place, so that's not a great start. I do have one reactor loaded, which is this sound here, which doesn't seem to have magically pulled Pro Tools together or anything like that. It's just clicking and going ahead. However, I still have an audio interface that I haven't tried, so I'm going to install the Zoom USB 3 interface just to see if that makes any difference. So now we're going through this fella here, very smart looking Zoom USB 3 interface. And I'm still getting glitches. And also the MIDI stopped working, and I don't really know why. Let's see if we can do that magic thing of changing the buffer size. Set up playback engine. Nah, I can't. If I make any changes there, it's going to force me to restart Pro Tools, and then that's not going to work. So on this occasion, I don't even have any compressor plugins loaded. This is just 8 channels of audio, so you can imagine what it's going to be like just to record some guitar and vocals in. No, it's going to be a disaster. And there's one other groovy thing with the Zoom interface, is that it hangs Pro Tools on exit. I don't know, it's a USB 3 interface, there's a USB 3 port. I don't know. Cubase then, same 8 tracks of audio I've just loaded in. I'm just going to set them playing, and then I'm going to add a reactor track and some effects, and just to see if it crackles. Now, this time I have already disabled ASIO guard, so we're going to give it the best chance we can of working flawlessly. Well, there you go, there's some messing about in Cubase, making music with stuff, and it seems okay. There's nothing untoward going on down here. I'm adding different effects, I'm adding extra instruments and bits and pieces. It's not particularly inspired at the moment, but I'm conscious of how much time this is all taking, and I don't want to waste your time. But suffice to say, with the ASIO guard off, Cubase appears to be behaving normally. Now, it may well be that we're not getting the performance that we would get if this was working completely properly, like we get on the Surface Pro 3 or on another system. But Cubase is running, it is enabling me to be creative, it's enabling me to do some music, which is really all I want at the end of the day. In Studio One, same deal, I've turned off multi-processing to give it the best chance of working. Got the 8 tracks of audio sitting in there, sitting pretty and playing back nicely. Now I'm starting to get a bit of a glitch there now. And the performance meter is now starting to hit the top. Yeah, I'm definitely starting to get clips and pops there. So that's 8 tracks of audio, a couple of effects, a reactor, and the MiTi instrument, which seemed to be a bit too much for it. So is that decent performance? Not really, because I've had to turn off multi-processor support. It's only running on a single core, and that can very quickly fill up. And if it can't spread that processing around, then you're going to hit that ceiling quite quickly, like I have done there. Ableton Live, give that a go, shall we? So Ableton Live then doesn't appear to be any trouble, as far as I could tell. Was there some? I mean, you get a little bit of bleeping with these kinds of synths, so sometimes that can disguise a glitch, but as far as I could tell, that seemed to be working pretty all right. Let's finish off then with the one that should work, which is Bitwig Studio. So I play and I play and I play, and Bitwig is not fussed, doesn't care, it's having a lovely time. Very interesting. So, you know, I've spent a day on this. Well, I've spent weeks on this, battling through various issues and problems and trying to work out why the hell it glitches like it does in certain circumstances. And today I was able to sort of go through every test that I've done one more time just to confirm that it's doing what I think it's doing. And I think I've done that. I think you can see that it's not my specific surface. I have these other surfaces that I've also tried, and that's the same. I've also shown that it's not ASIO for all, because I've got different audio interfaces working in the same way, giving the same problems. I've also shown, I think, that it might be software related, in that Bitwig Studio doesn't seem to suffer from the same problems as other things do. Ableton Live doesn't suffer from as many problems. FL Studio doesn't suffer from quite as many problems. So there's definitely an element of how well the software is written or how tailored it is for this sort of technology that has an impact on how well it runs on the Surface Pro 4. I've also shown that there are some potential workarounds for some of the more troublesome bits of software like Cubase, Studio One and Pro Tools. But what I hope is that these tests and what I've demonstrated here today is enough to give you an idea of what the Surface Pro 4 is capable of. So there you have it. I hope these tests and what I've done here has been helpful to you. Some software is working really well and other software isn't really quite so much. I mean, at the time of filming, which is the 5th of May, there's no sort of overall solution to the problems that I've encountered. However, that may change, and if so, I'll update the description below. These tests were the best and most meaningful tests that I could come up with in terms of music production. They're not perfect or exhaustive, but I've worked very hard to try to give an accurate picture of what the Surface Pro 4 can do. And I've repeated these tests with multiple surfaces and with multiple audio interfaces and with all sorts of Windows tweaks on and off. So please be aware that your mileage may vary. I've heard from people who have had no trouble at all, and in fact, maybe the way they're using their Surface Pro 4 just doesn't bring these issues to light, which is awesome for them. But unfortunately, a lot of other people have had very similar issues to what I've shown here. I think I've demonstrated that it's not related to a faulty surface, that it's not anything to do with the audio interface. It doesn't seem related to power profiles or to Windows tweaks. I've run DPC latency tests and Nothing has stood out as a problematic driver. It could be the Skylake CPU technology, where the sort of speed shifting is just not moving fast enough to cope with the data moving through. But then I've also tested another laptop which has a very similar CPU, and that seemed fine. Maybe it's down to how the DAW software is written. I mean, why does Bitwig Studio work and Pro Tools doesn't? But then why does all the software work fine on the Surface Pro 3? Like I say, it's maddeningly inconsistent. You know, and I could be doing something really stupid, although actually on this occasion that's looking less and less likely. And I would welcome any of your half-baked ideas in the comments below. So where does that leave us? Well, let me summarise my findings. Pro Tools. Although the buffer size switch can help if you've got an Avid audio interface, for most people you're kind of screwed. So at the moment I wouldn't recommend Pro Tools for the Surface Pro 4. Cubase, turning off ASIO guard really seems to sort it out as far as I can tell, so that looks like a really positive solution. I mean, you get a tiny drop in performance, but otherwise Cubase is working well. Studio One, turning off multiprocessing seems to sort it out, but you do have this large drop in performance, and so, you know, it's not ideal. FL Studio seems to work really well until you start moving windows about, and then it gets a bit crackly. But that's the sort of thing that looks like it could be solved in just a normal software update. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Ableton Live, overall the current version, which is 9.6.1, is looking pretty good. I have heard from people who have had lots of problems with Ableton, but as I understand it, this latest update has kind of sorted those things out. However, the performance doesn't seem to be as good as it was on the Surface Pro 3. But overall, it's pretty cool. Reaper, yeah, that seems fine as far as I can tell. Propellerheads Reason, well, I've not really seen any problems, but I know other people who have, so I have mixed feelings about that. Although, as far as I gather, if you rewire it through something else which is working, then the problems go away. So maybe that's the solution for Reason. Bitwig Studio, well, this little trooper seems to have no trouble at all. I mean, I don't know what sort of magic sauce they're sprinkling over their code, but they really need to give that to everybody else. Bitwig Studio behaved exactly as I expected it to, from the Surface Pro 3 to the Surface Pro 4. The performance differences and the usage on the Surface Pro 4 was exactly as I expected it to be. It's a nice one, Bitwig. So overall, most music production software can be made to work on the Surface Pro 4. However, it's not perhaps at the performance level that it should be. I don't really expect to have this amount of trouble and this amount of fiddling and fudging on a machine of this caliber. Microsoft have been pushing the Surface as a creative platform, and luckily they sort of stumbled into Bitwig, which has worked perfectly for them. And so they haven't encountered any of the problems that I'm reporting here. What I don't understand is why there doesn't appear to be anyone at Microsoft who's making music on their hardware. I mean, the problems present themselves almost immediately, and yet everything that I've been talking about seems to have come as complete news to them. If they want a share of Apple's creative pie, then they really need to get these things right. They need someone to curate the music production side of their hardware, or they're just going to miss an opportunity to capture a large chunk of the creative market. I should add that apps that use regular Windows drivers like StaffPad or FL Studio Groove are all working fine, because they don't require the sort of low-level latency that we need in music production. The Surface Pro 3 was spectacular at running music software. The basics were never a problem, and I could spend my time making videos on how to use touch and how to use the pen and how to get the best out of this creative platform. I had hoped, and I completely assumed, that the Surface Pro 4 would be just as awesome. In fact, better, because it would have more headroom and less of that throttling CPU problem. And I'm sad to say that I'm a bit disappointed. However, the Surface Pro 4 is still the best laptop type thingy I've ever owned. The whole business with the pen, the touchscreen, it's awesome. I would never go back to any kind of laptop that doesn't have a touchscreen and pen interface. It's fabulous at getting work done, it's great with Photoshop, it's just an awesome piece of equipment. And I know it can work well with Bitwig Studio and Reaktor and loads of other software with a little bit of fiddling, so it's not a complete disaster by any means. But the issues that I've encountered do bring along a certain amount of doubt into its competency as a music production platform. However, I dearly hope that I've shown that it still has a huge amount of potential. I will forge on, I will keep on making videos. You never know, there might be a solution just around the corner, a firmware update that smooths the whole thing out. And I'm going to start demonstrating making actual music on the Surface Pro 4 just so that we can hit those limitations, see how much it can do or how little it can do, and whether it can actually be a decent music production tool. What I don't know is whether the Surface Book or the entry-level Surface Pro 4 with the M-Core processor has the same problems. And I would love to find out if anyone could send me one. Time for a stiff drink, I think. Oh, damn it, Microsoft. You should be killing it with the Surface Pro 4. You should have knocked it clear out of the park. It's the most awesome piece of mobile hardware you've ever produced, and yet somehow you just are missing it at the moment, and that just kills me. It should be the greatest music-making, multi-touching mobile machine that's ever existed. It has everything going for it. So come on, Microsoft, get it to work. Until then, go make some tunes.